Hello, good evening. Once again, this is CU Immigration here on UPTV and or YouTube. Again, we're unable to broadcast from the WRFU studio, so I'm doing it from my home again. So I hope you can put up with the slightly unorthodox setting here. It can't look much worse than it looks at the IMC, but it probably doesn't sound as good from here. But anyway, I wanted to welcome you again. This is CU Immigration. We talk about immigration-related matters. I have kind of a hodgepodge of stories here for you this week. I may come up with a way that they relate together at some point, but at this moment, I'm not sure that they do. I don't really have a theme this week. There's so many different things going on. A lot of our attention is captivated by the impeachment hearings, and I know that, I don't know if you're like me, you're following all of this stuff very carefully, and I think the administration's ability to deal with some other things that they'd like to think are important has been curtailed a certain amount, which for some of us who strongly disagree with the direction that this administration seems to want to go in on a number of issues, but in particular immigration, that's a good thing. So the more confused and distracted they can be by other things, hopefully the less awful stuff they'll come up with for immigrants, and maybe at least we can coast through to the election and then get in somebody who doesn't have the kind of attitudes that seem to be prevalent in the current administration. Anyway, so the first story that I have here is sort of about, I know we've talked a lot about immigrants in terms of economics, and I have repeatedly stated that I don't like doing that because that sort of it turns the situation away from being an issue about people and the people that are coming here and the reasons they're coming here, and it turns it into a story about whether they cost us or make us money, and in the short term or the long term or whatever, and those things are hard to figure out. Most economic indicators are pretty strongly in favor of immigration. Immigrants take a lot of jobs that Americans don't want and are willing to do them enthusiastically, let's say, as opposed to just grudgingly, like you'll find with some people going to work and like, yeah, I'll do my job, but I'm not going to like it, and you're not going to like it either. But a lot of immigrants will go in there and I'm going to do a good job and it's going to be great. So not all of them, but some of them, many, will do that. And that's helpful economically for small businesses and struggling businesses that want to hire people and want to provide good services but can't afford to pay a whole lot to do it. A lot of immigrants are entrepreneurs. They start jobs, they hire other people, and they'll often do so in places that are economically challenged generally. So you have a lot of what have been described as dying cities being reborn because of immigrants coming in there and saying, well, I'm here, I've got a place to live, I'm going to make the most of it, I'm going to start a job, I'm going to start a grocery store or a restaurant or a lawn care business or whatever. There are a lot of immigrants that are high skilled and go slide smoothly into well-paying professions, but there are a lot of high-skilled immigrants that, because of licensing criteria and all sorts of different things, their credentials don't carry over. So you have people very, very highly educated doing mediocre jobs that don't require a lot of education, and you have high-skilled laborers that are ready and willing and able to do things that they're not being paid to do. So generally speaking, from all indicators, immigrants are financial boons to the economies of the places that they move to. So a lot of the pushback against them is either based around absolute falsehoods or things that are difficult to prove. And one of those things is that, immigrants are coming here because they're going to, steal your health insurance. They're what's making it hard for you to pay health insurance and all that sort of thing. So here's a study. Somebody actually did a study on this, and I thought this was interesting. So the title is, "A New Study Finds Immigrants Aren't Drawn to States That Offer Them Health Insurance." The study finds that low-income legal immigrants don't tend to move to states that offer them health insurance, suggesting that expanding their access to medical care wouldn't create a, quote, welfare magnet that could overwhelm public resources. Using data from the American Community Survey, capturing over 200,000 immigrants nationwide between 2000 and 2016, Stanford University's Vasil Yazanov, Duncan Lawrence, Fernando Mendoza, and Jens Heinmüller found that expanding public insurance offerings in certain states didn't have a discernible effect on immigrants who had already settled in the U.S., choosing to relocate to those states. The paper pushes back on President Donald Trump's rhetoric, suggesting that immigrants take advantage of public health insurance and drain the social safety net. Trump has pursued several policies impeding immigrants' access to health care, though for now they have been blocked in federal court. Trump recently tried to prevent immigrants who do not have health insurance and cannot afford to pay medical care costs from entering the country as a way to cut costs for American citizens, and his public charge rule was estimated to cause tens of thousands of immigrants on Medicaid to drop their benefits. The study could also inform debates about whether states should open their health insurance programs to more immigrants. 6 states, and Washington, D.C., use state funds to offer Medicaid to unauthorized immigrant children, and California recently extended coverage to unauthorized immigrant adults as well. The researchers focused on specific categories of immigrants: low-income pregnant women and children who had recently obtained lawful permanent residency and were below 200% of the poverty line, and that there should probably be punctuation in that. So it's low-income pregnant women, comma, and children, but it doesn't say that. But that's how it should read. Who became eligible for state-level public insurance programs following a series of federal reforms in 2002 and 2009. They had been previously barred from participating in those programs if they had held green cards for less than 5 years under Clinton-era welfare reforms passed in 1996. The 2002 reforms allowed states to provide prenatal care to immigrant women under the Children's Health Insurance Program. In 2009, the Child Health Insurance Reauthorization Act allowed states to cover both immigrant children and pregnant women regardless of how long they had held green cards. As a result, the number of states offering them health insurance nearly doubled from 2000 to 2016. Researchers thought immigrant mothers and children would be the most likely groups to make interstate moves due to expanded health care coverage, Yazanov said in an interview. But they observed no significant effect on their interstate migration rates. Those results were surprising in light of prior studies about immigrants' mobility and health care coverage. Immigrants tend to move around within the U.S. more than their U.S.-born counterparts. Immigrants may choose to settle in areas with better public benefits, and substantially fewer immigrants have health insurance compared to U.S. citizens. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation study, non-citizens are significantly more likely to be uninsured than citizens among those under age 65. 23% of immigrants with legal status and 45% of unauthorized immigrants are uninsured. All those factors would point to immigrants seeking out better health care benefits by relocating, but in reality, that's not the case. And that could assuage policymakers' concerns about expanding public health care programs to immigrants. Policymakers are often concerned with fiscal constraints when they extend public health care and other public benefits. The concern that people might be moving from another country, from another state, from another city would lead to spiraling costs, Yazanoff said. We hope our results are informative to policymakers who are looking for evidence in the healthcare world, especially in the context of legal immigrants. There are some limitations to the paper. It doesn't speak to the effect of public health care offerings on unauthorized immigrants, a point of friction in the 2020 presidential race. Nearly all of the Democratic candidates have backed the idea of providing immigrants health care coverage regardless of immigration status. Every candidate raised their hands when asked if they supported it at a debate in June, but Trump is trying to use it against his Democratic rivals. Quote, "As long as I'm president, no one will lay a hand on your Medicare benefits," Trump told voters at a speech in Florida on Thursday. "I will never allow these politicians to steal your health care and give it away to illegal immigrants," end quote. Now, of course, anybody who's got half a brain will take that Trump quote with several large sacks of salt, because for one thing, nobody's talking about laying their hands on Medicare benefits except certain Republicans. I have to say, and again, let me make this caveat. I'm starting to make this like on a weekly basis here, but this is a nonpartisan show in the sense that we do not advocate for any political party, any particular candidate. We are not trying to promote, we're not working for anybody and trying to promote their candidacy. However, that being said, as we are a pro-immigrant organization, I am a pro-immigrant person, and I support immigrants' rights. It is impossible to do that and not point out, or it would be, let me rephrase that. It's not impossible. It would be irresponsible for me to talk about what's going on in the world of immigration, talk about what's happening to immigrants, and talk about politics generally, and not mention who is trying to create laws, trying to create regulations that are anti-immigrant, who is basically making up stories and lying about the kinds of people that are coming here in order to turn citizens against them. Who is using immigration, in other words, as a wedge issue? I can't, in good conscience, sit here and talk to you week after week and tell you about what's going on in immigration and not tell you that there are people, there is a certain political party, a certain administration that is anti-immigrant and that is working to turn you and me into anti-immigrants as well, as a way of getting us to support them instead of anybody else. I can't do it. I can't do it. So I am here to tell you what's going on, and in doing that, I'm going to have to tell you that a certain party, Republicans, I will not mince words, have been basically co-opted by xenophobic, racist, and anti-immigrant factions. And our next article will illustrate that very clearly. But I just have to point it out to you because, UPTV, WRFU, where we usually are located, these are nonpartisan organizations. They're not supposed to be advocating for or against anybody. And so I'm only telling you these things so you understand who's doing what. End of rant. I can't stress that enough. I would like to be able to just report this and say there are some people who think this, and there's some people that think that, and these things are happening, and these things are happening, and here's how I think you can help this issue. I can't do that without saying these people over here, these people who are in power right now, are really trying hard to hurt people that I care about and that I'm trying to support. I have to tell you that because it is true. That is not me seeking to make you biased in one way or another. That is a simple fact that I'm reporting. And so the chips will fall where they may. Someone may complain about it, but that's the way it is. And on that note, I will get to the next article, which is White Nationalist Websites Cited by Stephen Miller. In case you don't know, Stephen Miller works in the White House. He's a White House aide. The article reads as follows. Peter Brimlow, the founder of the anti-immigration website VDare, believes that diversity has weakened the United States and that the increase in Spanish speakers is a ferocious attack on the living standards of the American working class. That is a quote. Jared Taylor, the editor of the white nationalist magazine American Renaissance, is a self-described white advocate who has written that newcomers are not the needy, they are the greedy, end quote. Their websites were among the sources cited by Stephen Miller, the White House aide who is the driving force behind President Trump's immigration policies, in emails and conversations with conservative allies at Breitbart News when he was a young Senate aide. Cache, C-A-C-H-E, cache of those, cache? Not sure. A cache of those emails, obtained by the Southern Poverty Law Center, provides new insight into the ideas that have shaped Mr. Miller's thinking and suggest he has maintained deeper intellectual ties to the world of white nationalism than previously known. The heart of where these guys differ from neoconservatives and Republican orthodoxy is basically what is the American nation and what is the nature of American nationhood. Lawrence Rosenthal, the chair and the lead researcher at the Berkeley Center for Right-Wing Studies at the University of California, said in an interview, "It's not based on we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's based on what were the color of the people who wrote those words." The Law Center has labeled VDare a hate website for its ties to white nationalists and publications of race-based science, and the Anti-Defamation League calls American Renaissance a white supremacist journal. Both sites approvingly cite Calvin Coolidge's support for a 1924 law that excluded immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe and praise The Camp of the Saints, a 1973 French novel that popularizes the idea that Western civilization will fall at the hands of immigrants. Mr. Miller had no comment on the emails. The White House, which has publicly denounced bigotry on Mr. Miller's behalf and equated the Law Center's report to libel, did not respond to a request for comment. But Katie McHugh, the former Breitbart editor who leaked the messages, which were among a small handful of some 900 emails sent from March 2015 to June 2016, said in an interview last week that it's easy to draw a clear line from the white supremacist websites where he is getting his ideas to current immigration policy. Ms. McHugh was fired in 2017 for writing anti-Muslim Twitter posts. She has since renounced white nationalist viewpoints and shared her emails with the Southern Poverty Law Center to make amends. Michael Hayden, the Law Center reporter with whom she initially shared the messages, said in an interview, I'm sorry. Let me reread that because sometimes I'm reading these things I've glanced through them before, but I'm reading them for the first time. And so I don't read them the right way. Ms. McHugh, repeating myself, was fired in 2017 for writing anti-Muslim Twitter posts. She has since renounced white nationalist viewpoints and shared her emails with the Southern Poverty Law Center to make amends. Michael Hayden, the Law Center reporter with whom she initially shared the messages, said in an interview. In other words, he said the things. Yeah, anyway, you get it now. Cass Moody, A political scientist at the University of Georgia who studies right-wing movements said in an email that both VDARE and American Renaissance are white nationalist organizations who provide a pseudo-intellectual veneer to classic racism. Mr. Miller's familiarity with white nationalist thinking predated his job as a staff aide to Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama. As a college student at Duke University, he worked with a fellow student, the white nationalist Richard Spencer, to arrange for Mr. Brimlow to speak on campus. The emails show a continued interest after his arrival in Washington. In the emails to Breitbart, a topic Mr. Miller referred to more than once was the Coolidge-era immigration law, which ushered in 40 years of lowered immigration levels with discriminatory quotas aimed at Southern and Eastern Europeans, whom critics at the time attacked as non-white. On August 4, 2015, Mr. Miller sent an email supporting the idea of a complete ban on immigration, like Coolidge did, an apparent reference to the 1924 law. As a result of those new national origin quotas, immigration fell by half, and the arrival of Italians and Poles fell by 90%. Mr. Sessions, Mr. Miller's boss at the time, was known for publicly praising Coolidge's policies because he believed they had bolstered American wages. The 1924 law endorsed by Coolidge is widely seen today as a symbol of bigotry and was heavily influenced by the eugenics movement. Coolidge embraced the so-called scientific argument that Italians and Eastern Europeans were genetically inferior, said Daniel Okrent, whose book The Guarded Gate is a history of the 1924 law. The law was disturbing, he said, not only because of the theories behind it, but also because it prevented hundreds of thousands of would-be migrants from escaping the Nazis. Those people could have lived if they hadn't locked the door, Mr. Okrent said. Mark Krikorian of the Center for Immigration Studies, whose work Mr. Miller has often referred to in White House policy discussions, said that Coolidge had a complicated legacy. He reached the right result, meaning low immigration, but in the wrong way. But a recent article by Jerry Kammer of the Immigration Center, which backs new immigration restrictions, said Coolidge supported an odious form of restrictionism by embracing the national origin quotas. In an interview, Mr. Kammer said, citing Coolidge as a lodestar for the restrictionist movement was an unfortunate and unwise and highly dubious association. I think Stephen Miller has taken legitimate concerns about immigration to illegitimate extremes when he ties it to ethnicity and nationality, he said. This is Mr. Kammer speaking. In his communications with Breitbart, Mr. Miller does not explicitly endorse the national origin quotas, but he praises Coolidge and his legacy. He complains that something tells me there's not a Calvin Coolidge exhibit at an expanding immigration museum. On June 2, 2015, he wrote that Immigration Heritage Month would seem a good opportunity to remind people about the heritage established by Calvin Coolidge, which covers 4 decades of the 20th century, an apparent reference to the period between 1924 and 1965 when immigration quotas were in effect. There are dozens of references to the Coolidge era on American Renaissance. In one email to Ms. McHugh, Mr. Miller writes approvingly about the Camp of the Saints. Chelsea Steiber, a specialist in French literature at Catholic University, said the approving reference was disturbing because the book made the case against migration in explicitly racial terms. In white nationalist circles, it invokes the theory of the Great Replacement and the fall of the White West, she said, referring to the theory that white civilization will be overrun by dark-skinned invaders from the developing world. Ms. McHugh recalled a phone conversation in July 2015 in which Mr. Miller called her to discuss an article he had read on Ren, or American Renaissance. The article, New DOJ Statistics on Race and Violent Crimes, was by Mr. Taylor, who noted that the Justice Department had begun reporting Latinos in a separate category on crime statistics rather than lumping them in with whites. Mr. Taylor also wrote that the department had long counted Hispanics as a victim category in its hate crime reports. We look forward to their inclusion as a perpetrator category, he added. While Mr. Miller has long pushed the idea that immigration increases crime, decades of evidence suggest otherwise. People with inquiring minds have to look elsewhere, Mr. Taylor said, disputing the idea that he is a white supremacist, and more power to those who have inquiring minds. Mr. Brimlow said his visit to Duke was the only time he and Mr. Miller had met. Mr. Miller also arranged for Peter Lawfer, an author who wrote a book arguing for open borders with Mexico, to visit and debate Mr. Brimlow. Mr. Lawfer recalled sitting with Mr. Miller, Mr. Spencer, and Mr. Brimlow before the debate and realizing that he had been invited to be knocked down for his beliefs. There is no question that these people were learning from each other, feeding off each other, and in concert in these viewpoints, Mr. Lawfer said. Much of the email's content can be seen as foreshadowing the course that the Trump administration has taken under the influence of Mr. Miller. The nostalgia for Coolidge and all-white Northern European immigration of the past was echoed in Mr. Trump's famous denunciation of immigrants from, quote, and I won't say it here, blank hole countries, and his calls for more Norwegians. In a report on the administration's proposed public charge rule, the Nonpartisan Migration Policy Institute concluded that it would shift migration away from Mexico and Central America and move it toward other world regions, especially Europe. The central theme of the Camp of the Saints, another work Mr. Miller referenced in his communications with Breitbart, is that immigrants seek to exploit Western society's kindness, that a welcoming ethos is itself a threat. That is a theme that Mr. Trump has advertised at mass rallies with his recitation of The Snake, a poem that he has turned into a parable of refugee treachery about a kindly woman who takes in a wounded reptile and is repaid with a venomous bite. "I saved you," cried the woman, "and you've bitten me even. Why? You know your bite is poisonous, and now I'm going to die." "Oh, shut up, silly woman," said the reptile with a grin. "You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in." With Mr. Miller taking the lead, refugee admissions during the Trump administration have fallen by nearly 3/4 to the lowest level since the modern program began in 1980. So, I read other articles about the same situation that were more pointed and drew some more disturbing conclusions, but I thought this one would be nice and fair and just wouldn't go too far in any particular direction. But clearly, there's something going on. Let's just be fair. Let's face facts. The rhetoric that comes from the administration, particularly Trump, about immigrants is vile. It is vile. And there are a number of people that have been highly placed at various times in the administration who have also repeated such kinds of statements. Immigrants are people. They're people like you. They're people like me. They're people from all over the place. They come from different places. They come here for different reasons. There are good people. There are some bad people. There are lots of people in between. You cannot say immigrants are X. Immigrants are Y. Immigrants are people. Moving here is complicated. The question of whether or how much we should control our borders or control who comes here is a decent argument to have. And I'm not against having that argument as long as it's done in a fair and honest way. If you want to point out statistics and say XYZ means that this is a good idea, or someone might say it's a bad idea, but that kind of argument is fine. But when you start getting into lying about people or believing things that are not true,